We are the only industry that uses these specific models. They were created about 20 years ago when DU and LP came out with their automated underwriting system. So these are the scores that we utilize, and they look at different criteria than the consumer scores. But just to recap this slide, there's really a ton of different scores. You could get pre-qualified from a mortgage company today. You could go to try to buy a car and they would pull your credit. You could go to Credit Karma. You could have your credit pulled from multiple sources all within the same day and get a 50 to 100 point swing in the scores. The auto industry has their own score models for auto loans. We have bankruptcy attorneys that utilize our systems. We have a special score for them that dictates whether bankruptcy will be filed based on that score model. And then, of course, you have Credit Karma to provide scores. You have annualcreditreport.com, which takes you directly to the bureaus. And then just exactly like Dave said, they provide the Vantage score, which is a consumer model. And again, they look at some different criteria. So we'll get into that on some of these next slides. So, what goes into your FICO scores? The payment history is really important. It's 35%. The amounts that you owe is 30%. Length of credit history. So the longer you've had trade lines on your file, the better off you are. If you're in a situation where you have 10 or 15 credit cards and maybe you wanted to close some of those, my recommendation would always be let's close the most recent ones that we've opened to keep those older established trade lines on our file that are really helping keep our scores up. Credit use is 10%. So, what our score model is looking for, and by the way, what's in your FICO score, I'm moving on the mortgage score model this point forward. So that's really what we're looking at here. Credit use is our score model on the mortgage side wants to see revolving and installment loans. So they want to see credit cards, but we also want to see a mortgage, a car payment, a student loan, that kind of thing to get that mix of trades on the report. And then are you out shopping for new credit? So that makes up 10%. Are you looking for credit cards or car loans or mortgages, that type of thing? Because don't forget, there's hard inquiries and soft inquiries, and these hard inquiries that, anyone uses to do a loan. So when you go to get a car or you get a mortgage or to buy a boat or something like that, they're always going to do a hard pull for underwriting to determine your credit worthiness and base it off of that. So these inquiries generally deduct a couple of points from everyone's score when they're pulled. For some reason, and I'm not quite sure, inquiries are considered derogatory items. I guess because you're out shopping and looking to add additional debt and credit, they consider that potentially a drog. Again, not a huge deal, but it's a couple of points. Couple things to keep in mind regarding inquiries. So for the loan officers out there, when you're looking at our credit reports and you see the inquiry section, Fannie and Freddie only require the mortgage industry to show the last 120 days of inquiries on the report. However, the credit score that's on that credit report is taking into account inquiries prior to that. So inquiries will stay on your credit file for a period of 2 years. However, again, the mortgage industry only wants to see inquiries from the last 120 days. And what they're really looking for is, were you out shopping for a new loan and did you open that account? Did you get the credit card? Did you get the car loan? That kind of thing for them to take into account. So you could potentially see if somebody had a ton of inquiries prior to those 120 days, that might be keeping their scores down a little bit. And similar to other derogatory items, if you have a lot of inquiries, it's keeping your scores down a bit versus only having one or two. So again, in regards to inquiries in the mortgage and auto space, we do have that 30-day window. So the borrower can shop multiple mortgage companies. Not that they're going to do that after they speak to Dave and the team. Of course, they're going to lock in and want to move forward with those guys to get the best deal they can. But they're in the position to shop multiple outlets for a loan within a 30-day period, and it's only deducting points from the score that one time. So similar in the car industry, if you guys have ever bought a car, which I'm sure you all have, and what a joy that is, going in to talk to the finance manager and all that kind of stuff. So you've got 30 days again to shop multiple car outlets where it's only deducting points from the score that one time. Any questions on that? Or
I'd like to ask a question about the utilization. You said we want a variety of installment loans versus revolving debt, and revolving debt is credit cards. How does the algorithm look at student loans? Because most of them are maxed out, right? So does it look at that student loan as being a maxed out trade line, and that'll have a negative impact on the algorithm?
Excellent question, Dave. The student loans are under the installment category. So when the algorithms look at the revolving accounts versus installment, they look at them differently. With revolving accounts, you're right on. They're looking at what is your credit line and what is your balance currently? Are you maxed out? What's going on with that? But the installment loans, they look at differently. So they're not really doing that utilization on the installment loan like they are on the credit cards. So it works a little bit differently. Your scores would really get crushed if they were counting these installment loans as maxed out accounts like they would on the credit card side. So that's again where our recommendation, and you guys know this on the Stockton side, fastest, easiest way to move somebody's credit scores is to concentrate on those credit card accounts. When I look at a credit report to help a borrower or a loan officer, first thing I do is scan the report. I'm looking for the revolving accounts that are the most maxed out. Doesn't matter what the balance and the high credit ratios are, like, or what the amounts are. It could be $5,000 and you owe $49.50, so you're maxed out on that card and it's absolutely crushing your score. Or it could be $500. Could be a Sam's Club $500 card and you owe $475. Same thing, crushing the score because you're maxed out on those credit cards. Versus exactly what Dave was talking about, when you take out that car loan or that student loan, you're immediately maxed out on that. So, what they're really looking for there is, as the installment loans progress, timely payments, of course, that you're paying down the account. Because one of the things too is, like when we talked about closing some of these credit card accounts, you have to be careful with installment loans. If you paid off the only installment loan you have on your file, like your car loan or your mortgage or your student loan, you may drop your score a point or two or a couple of points, because now the algorithm doesn't see an active open installment loan that you're currently making a payment on. So try to remember, credit scores are all about your ability to borrow money, but more importantly, how do you pay that back? And that's really what the credit score is. How well do you pay back monies that you've borrowed? So that's the differences between those installments and those revolving accounts. Consumer files are okay without installment loans or without revolving accounts. You could still score very high with only having one or two of those types of accounts on your file. But our mortgage score, of course, a mortgage loan is an installment. So we really want to see, how well are you borrowing that $400,000 and how well are you paying that back? Great point, Dave. So a couple of things I just wanted to point out as we were talking the differences between consumer and mortgage accounts. Experian Boost is a very popular program, and it's a great program for young kids coming out of college that don't really have an established credit file. So what they're doing is they're taking accounts that are traditionally not reported to somebody's credit file, and they're starting to report them. And that could be like mobile phones or cable or utilities or something that's not traditionally generated. I bring up Experian Boost because I think it's a great program. However, I wanted to point out the fact that it has absolutely no effect on our credit scores on the mortgage side whatsoever. Okay. So for you loan officers out there, when you're pulling these credit reports and you see these trade lines called self-reported, so that would be an indication that's potentially an Experian Boost account where they've added a trade line that's not traditionally factored into the credit score. So again, it's a great program, but don't rush out or don't recommend to a borrower they do Experian Boost to help our credit scores, because our credit scores are not factoring those trade lines into the credit score calculation. They are on the consumer side, but not on the mortgage side. So this guy's here is a little bit small. Can you guys see that okay? So basically what this is just a sample of a scorecard on how they calculate the credit score. So what's super important to remember is that all three of the credit bureaus use the same essentially mortgage models, the FICO score models that they created for the mortgage industry. What's really important, what creates a difference in the scores, is not every creditor reports to all three of the bureaus. Okay. So when you guys are looking at these reports, you'll see XP, EFX, and TU. So what that's indicating, if you just see one of those, like EFX, then that trade line is only reporting to Equifax. If you see two of them, then it's only reporting to two. And if it's on all three, the big guys, typically your Bank of America, Wells Fargo, all the major guys are reporting to all three. But what we see a lot of times are smaller accounts, such as like a collection company or potentially a public record, which, by the way, on our credit reports these days under the public record section, typically all you're seeing is bankruptcy information. Used to be back in the day, we would see foreclosures or we would see judgments filed for a bad apartment lease or something like that. The bureaus have pretty much purged all that information from the public record section of the files. So what you're seeing is bankruptcy information. So what's important to remember is as this information filters through these score models, a lot of times you get a difference in the score from Equifax to TransUnion because there's an account that's not on there. There might be a collection reporting to one bureau versus the other that's dragging that one score down. So that's where it's really important to utilize the expertise from Dave and his team to look at this. They know that's happening and they're able to determine if we're going to make an adjustment through a rescore or make a payment, we're going to focus on that one bureau that's going to affect that middle score that we're looking for. So this is really just an example of if you say you have 2 credit cards and say you're getting 30 points for having 2 credit cards on your file, it's just showing if you added another credit card that you're adding points to your score category for that particular item. Or if you're adding too many, then they start deducting points. So as you go through this, you'll see number of inquiries on the file or number of months on file. So these all go back to some of the things that we talked about as far as how many inquiries do you have, how old are your trade lines, and you're getting points assigned for those categories. So my running joke is don't go out and tattoo your credit score to your forearm because chances are next week or next month, that's going to be a different number. As you make payments and you make changes or you add things to your file, your scores are constantly being calculated and deducted. And for the most part, I mean, if you did a credit report 6 months ago and you had a 780 credit score, that's awesome. That gives you an idea. But here it is 6 months later, you've made a ton of payments to your file. You maybe have paid off an account. So your score is going to be different. So it's a very fluid situation. And that's what's important to remember is really you have a credit score when somebody is pulling your credit file and the information is filtering through the score models and creating those scores. Okay.
This slide might be my favorite slide on the entire deck, just because we as loan officers, and we have quite a few loan officers on this call with us, we get that question all the time, or the real estate agent asks us, hey, we're trying to build credit for this client. How many credit cards should they have? And right here, this first box says the maximum we're going to get is 3, right? So if we have 4 or more, that's not going to have much of an impact if we have 3, right? So it looks like 3 is that sweet spot. Same thing when we're talking to clients about, hey, when the longer you have something, the more effect it has onto that algorithm. Right here, you're seeing 48 more months of history gives you the most bang for your buck, right? You close out that credit card, you lose almost 75 points of something that you had for years. So if we're going to take anything away from this entire deck, this is the slide right here.
And bear in mind, these numbers are not exact. So they're examples. So let's keep that in mind. And honestly, Dave, we get a lot of clients that'll call us, hey, I'm working on this file. What do you recommend? Somebody mentioned maybe opening a new account. So that could be a great idea or a program to go with, but bear in mind, based off of this length of credit history. So if you open a new account, say you open up a credit card, and it's going to report the next month because this information generally gets reported every month. But bear in mind, with our mortgage score algorithm, it's not going to have an effect on the credit score for a period of 6 months. Okay, so we open this new account, and what our algorithm wants to see is, okay, that's great that you opened it. We're going to deduct a point or two for having the inquiry, but we want to see you borrowing the money and we want to see you paying it back. And we want to see that for a period of 6 months. However, on a consumer file, you may see that account pop up right away and see it on your credit file, but it's already helping on the consumer score model. But again, our mortgage models were designed with how well are you borrowing money and you paying it back? My recommendation a lot of times would be, if underwriting is okay with it, to add somebody as an authorized user. So what you can do is add somebody to an existing credit card account that somebody's maybe had for a long time, because automatically they're getting that history that person who owns that credit card was getting. So your 19-year-old son that you just added as an authorized user now is getting the credit for having a credit card for 10 years that was paid on time. So that's really helpful. But I will say caution with underwriting. There's a lot of different rules that we don't know out there as far as how many authorized accounts you can have to do a loan, or if it's the only account you have. I don't think you can be an authorized user. So try to keep those 2 things in mind. If we're building a home or we're doing a new construction loan, we have time to open up a new trade line and have that help us out. But if we're looking for something right away, then maybe doing the authorized user might be a better route for us. But we definitely want to make sure that it's a current account, it's paid down. We don't want to add somebody as an authorized user to a derogatory account and all of a sudden see their scores drop as well.
Glad you brought up the authorized user. Can we just
Okay.
jump right back into that authorized user? Someone told me Amex does not put the previous history of that entire profile on it. If I put my child on a Discover card and I've had that Discover card for 5 years, you're automatically get on my child's credit report the 5-year history. But Amex doesn't do that. Amex does it from the start of the authorized user. Is that correct?
That is correct with a traditional American Express account, the green guy that you have to pay off every single month, because that's considered an open account and that's required to be paid off every month in full. But like I have an American Express Delta Sky Miles card, they sponsor a lot of things. So my card isn't a traditional American Express, so it works more like your Discover example. So American Express sponsors a lot of stuff, but if it's the traditional green guy, that's the open account, when you see it on the report, Dave, you're definitely right on with that.
Good to know. Thank you.
You bet. This slide here is just really talking about how much things can affect your score. So you'll see if your score is 680 versus if your score is a 780. So 780 obviously is a phenomenal credit score that gets us best pricing and all that kind of stuff. So we're in good shape with that. What this is saying is if you're a 680, chances are you've probably had one of these issues on your file previously. You've probably maxed out a credit card. Maybe you have a 30-day late payment. You've settled a collection account or something like that. So you're really being deducted less points for one of these derogatory items to happen again if you're in that 680 category. If you're a 780, you're going to lose a lot more points for having one of these issues, because if you're a 780 to start with, you've never had one of these issues. 780, you guys who pull reports know how difficult that is to get that score. So you don't see those very often, kind of thing. So that's really just showing you that if you're that 780, you may lose up to 110 points for a 30-day late payment versus 80 points if you're in the 680 category, because you've had that before. So your file has seen derogatory items and the algorithm is taking that into account. But remember, when it comes to mortgages, obviously we don't ever want to see a borrower 30-day late on a mortgage. It's 100 points off your score immediately. Again, the mortgage derogatories are going to be a lot harsher on our score model because we're all about mortgages than it would be like a credit card or something like that. And you can see the differences with that happening. Okay, so this talks a little bit about credit score 101 and collections. Bear in mind that collections will stay on your file for 7 years from the date that they initially missed the payment. Okay, so a collection account is a company that typically takes over a derogatory account. Let's take Wells Fargo. You had a credit card in college, it went bad and you never paid it. They tried to reach out to work something out, which would be typically a charge-off. So the difference between a charge-off and a collection is the charge-off is the original creditor is still trying to collect on that debt before they transfer it or sell it to a collection agency. So you might see a charge-off from Wells Fargo or from Bank of America or whoever it is that you might have a credit card with. That means that original creditor is still trying to collect on that, but they potentially could sell that account to a collection company after they've tried to keep it or after they've tried to collect on it. So there's really not a huge difference between a collection and a charge-off from a score standpoint. It's just a collection is a collection agency handling it. Charge-off is the original creditor handling that. Did you want to talk a little bit about the medical collections since we're talking collections, Dave?
Definitely, because that has changed drastically in the last 12 months of how we as mortgage originators look at the medical collections, and it's probably the quickest way to increase the score. So let's dive into that.
Basically, what happened last year, July of 2022, any medical collections, and this is strictly with the medical collections that were zero balance, were automatically purged from everyone's credit file as of July 1st of 2022. Okay. So if they had paid off a medical collection in January, then it was going to delete or be purged from their credit file, which created a huge increase in people's credit scores that had paid collections, whether they were $50 or whether they were $5,000. Removing those was a big deal. Two other things that they wanted to do at that time were they increased the time that is required to not report these collections, meaning right now a doctor could report somebody for a collection within 6 months. Say they sent out a bill, they never got a payment, that kind of thing. 6 months later, they could turn that person over for collection. Now they're being required to wait a full year to allow insurance companies to come in for the doctor to send you a bill, you submit it to your insurance. Of course, insurance tries to reject it and not pay it like all insurance companies do. They send it back to you, you fight with them, that kind of thing. Now they can't just turn you over for collection after 6 months. They have to wait a full year, which we're already seeing a lot less collections being filed with people that have medical insurance because it's now giving the insurance system time to work and get these things taken care of. And then at the end of this month in March, they're not going to report any medical collections under $500 from basically April 1st moving forward. So all those little pesky $80 collections that popped up while we were processing a loan that wasn't there, and then all of a sudden we did the refreshed report or the UDN prior to closing, boom, all of a sudden this $50 or $100 or $300 medical collection pops up. We're not going to see that anymore. So we're really encouraging loan officers to go back and really look at their databases and see when we were super busy over the last couple of years, did we run across some folks that had some medical collections that now maybe we've seen some jumps in their scores and getting rid of those collections altogether. I did a presentation like this yesterday for one of our banking clients, and somebody asked me, well, Mark, what if somebody pays off a medical collection today? Then what would happen? So a couple things, they could pay that collection off today. And just like we used to, try to get a letter, try to negotiate with the collection company, call them before you make the payment. I'm going to pay off this collection. I really need to get a letter stating that once it's paid, you're going to purge or delete that trade line from my credit file. We could do a rapid rescore and get that off within that 3 to 5 business days for a rapid rescore. If we had a letter from the collection company, kind of like we've always done before, it was always, hey, be careful with just paying that medical collection. Let's try to get it deleted or purged from the file if they're going to pay it, because that's where we're going to see the huge jump in score. So we can still do it that way through the rescore process, or the next time the creditor reports to the bureau systems are automatically purging these trade lines from their file. The issue with that is a lot of these collection companies don't report monthly. So if it's a small collection, they might only report quarterly or semi-annually or something like that. So you may have to wait a little bit longer, but they are all coming off eventually as they become zero balances. And what we're seeing is really a huge increase in the scores.
Hey, Mark, we had a quick question in the chat from Meryl.
Sure.
Is that for any collection after April 1st, or will it be retroactive up to 500?
Yeah, so only medical collections. It's only on the medical side.
But is it anything that hits April 1st or later, or will anything that's on there now be removed?
So both. Anything
Okay.
that's on their files that's under $500 will be removed, and they won't report anything under $500 moving forward.
Thank you.
Good question. Yep. So the only thing on this slide, really tax liens. So we talked about that already, that tax liens used to show up under the public record section of the credit reports, but they, as of 2017, no longer do that. Again, we're just seeing bankruptcies under that public record section. That's where they broke out, and now we're doing liens and judgments. I don't know if you guys get those on your reports or if you have access to that, but liens and judgments can be done either through credit or when you guys do like your data verify fraud report or something like that, you know, they're searching for the liens and judgments. You know, what happened, a lot of people were excited about them removing that information, but as you all know, being excellent loan officers, that a $10,000 tax lien can stop somebody even with an 800 credit score from moving forward with a loan. So that was great. It pumped up the credit scores, and well, I shouldn't say everybody. Some people in the mortgage industry were excited about that, but the ones that know that we'd still have to deal with that weren't that excited about that kind of thing. It's great to have a higher score, but that's still an issue that would have to get taken care of. Any questions on anything as of yet, or how we looking on time, Dave?
Oh, we're right on time.
Okay, perfect. Good. I just wanted to chat a little bit about breaches. A lot of people have their credit files frozen. And so when you pull their credit report, you'll see you don't get TransUnion or Equifax or something like that. It's frozen. So if the borrower goes back in to unfreeze that file, for the loan officers out there, you don't have to re-pull the credit report. You can go right into our system on our website to where the what if simulator and the wayfinder are, and you'll see unfreeze file. So you could click on that link and it would actually access the unfrozen file onto your credit report. The big thing I really want to relay is you don't have to go back in there, and please don't go back in there if the borrowers tell you that they've unfrozen their credit file and re-pull a brand new report. Because what we're doing when they unfreeze the file is just accessing the information and bringing it over to our credit report. So we don't want to have two pulls if we can avoid that for that situation. Or of course, you can just email us at customer support, or you can call the office and give them the file number. Hey, they unfroze their Equifax file. Can you merge it onto the system? There was a slide about breaches. There's about freezing, and I'm going to do my 2-second. Me and my wife were the victims of identity theft back in 2021. So you absolutely want to do everything you possibly can to protect your information. We have credit monitoring set up through a company, and we don't endorse any particular companies for this, but LifeLock, your banks, your credit cards, all that, they all offer some sort of credit monitoring. My recommendation is to do all three bureaus. We signed up with a company that was through AAA and it gave us Experian free, but you really need to monitor all three. So be aware as you're pulling your borrower's credit files that they have some sort of monitoring and they're getting alerts if their file is being pulled. But you also want to freeze your credit reports if you're not trying to get a loan. So when somebody asks me about freezing, that's the very first question I ask them. Are you planning on getting a mortgage loan or doing a car loan or something like that? Because my answer will differ, but everyone should have all three of their bureaus frozen and locked. You should have credit monitoring to protect yourself. Please do everything you possibly can. When you're pulling these people's credit files, these borrowers' credit files, do everything you can to protect the information. Opting out is always a great idea. The optoutprescreen.com. Get your names off of the list that the bureaus sell. So if you go to the optoutprescreen.com, it does it for all three bureaus. You can go to the website or the phone number, but you're telling them, do not sell my information to credit card companies, to mortgage companies, to insurance companies, because they make a ton of money off of selling our information, and they're going to do it to whoever they possibly can. But if you get on the opt-out list, then they're not going to sell that information anymore, and that's going to help protect your information. That's a great slide, by the way. Annualcreditreport.com is a free place for us to all go and get a copy of our credit report. Used to be once a year, but then during the pandemic, I think it's like you can do it once a week or once a month now, somebody was telling me. But that's a free place to go. They will ask you if you want credit scores, and those would be Vantage consumer scores, and they do charge you for those. So it's really up to you on if you want to see what that score is. But my recommendation is everyone should be pulling a copy of their consumer credit file at least once a year to look at your data and your trade lines. Make sure that all the trade lines are correct, that somebody hasn't broken in and opened up 2 or 3 credit cards that you're not aware of. I've had that happen a lot. Mark, I don't know where these 4 credit cards came from. Come to find out that person was the victim of identity theft and never even knew. So it's really important that we do that. The do not call is really annoying marketing phone calls that we get at night while we're trying to have dinner or do homework with the kids or something like that. That list does reset every couple of years. So if you did it before and you're getting calls, you might need to call it again and put your information in there. But some other helpful websites on there. So certainly dive in, and we're always here to help any way we can.
We got one question in the chat. Disputed accounts. Is there any way you can remove the dispute without killing the score? What happens is when we're looking at credit reports, if there's a trade line that's in dispute, we have to get those removed. And once we do, that more times than not decreases the score. Any suggestions how to get around that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, no magic formula. So a dispute, basically what it does is it takes that account out of the algorithm. When you dispute an account, and normally you're disputing a derogatory account like a collection or a late, the first time you dispute that account, what it's doing is it's pulling out of the score algorithm. So you don't have an accurate credit score. And that's why Fannie and Freddie want you to take the disputes off of those accounts. Because back, if you guys were around 2007, 2008, 2009, tons of 720 credit scores were being done and written and loans were being given with disputes all over the place. And those guys were 580s and 600s. So what's happening is the disputed account takes it out of the algorithm. And this happens once in a while too, you guys. It's crazy, but sometimes you'll see a dispute on a good account. And by the way, that's taking that good account out of the score algorithm. We've seen removing the dispute can help the score because now the score algorithm can take into account that good account. That doesn't happen very often. It's typically like Dave's scenario where the dispute comes off and the score drops. So what's important to try to remember at that point is look at the other trades on the file, because you've got to take the dispute off to get the loan to go through Fannie and Freddie. But look at their credit card accounts. Is there some way we could make a payment or pay off a credit card at the same time to negate that drop in the score by raising the credit card, getting points for paying off the credit card to negate the drop in the score on the disputed account? Because there's no magic formula. There's no way of doing what you would ask, Dave. Can we minimize the negative effect on the score by these disputed accounts? You just can't. That's really what happens. So now you'll also see on the credit reports where it says creditor has settled the account or has settled the dispute, or I'm drawing a blank on the verbiage, and I know you guys know what I'm talking about when you see consumer disagrees. So if it says that the creditor has settled the dispute, but the consumer disagrees, that account is not in dispute anymore. Once it says that the creditor has resolved the account, even though the consumer might dispute it again, it's still not disputed and it's still factored into the score, because it's only taking it out of the algorithm the very first time that you dispute the account. It's giving the whole system a chance to verify. When you dispute an account, the bureaus reach out to the creditor and they say, were they really late on that account? And if the creditor comes back and says yes, then they clear the dispute and that information stays on there.
That's good to know.
So try to look for other ways to negate that drop in the score at the same time we're trying to get that dispute off if we can.
We got one last question from Alton. What's the rescoring process or time frame from the time a debt has been paid? So how long does it take for someone to pay a debt for the credit score to update?
Okay. Two ways. Say I pay off my credit card today and I don't charge on it again. I just wait the traditional time frame. It generally takes, look, these creditors report every 30 days. Okay. So if you pay off an account today, figure it's going to be a solid 45 days to 60 days to see the system automatically update. And the only reason I say it that long is because the creditor could have reported yesterday and I might pay that account today. So now I have to wait until the whole next time that they report before it's going to show that I paid off my balance. Now I might get lucky and catch it the day before they report. And if they do, then boom, you could pull the file next week. There's really no way to know on any other accounts except for credit cards. So if you look at your credit card statements, you'll see a closing date and a payment date. Okay. The payment date is when your payment is due, but the closing date closes out your cycle. So if you pay off your credit card on the payment date, you pay it to zero, but the next day you start using that card and you start charging it, you're now going to have a balance between the payment date and the closing date. Okay. So I want my balance to be zero or a very small balance on the closing date, because the closing date is when the creditor reports to the bureau. So you could have a client that says, I paid off my credit card in full on the payment date, but then they started using it again. The payment date and the closing date are about a week apart. So if I charged up $5,000 in that week, the creditor is now going to send $5,000 as my balance to the bureau when they report. So you want to look at your credit card statements, because you can determine, you guys can help your borrowers pay these credit cards down and get scores without really doing rescores through us. I'll deny that if my company asks that I preach that out, but I do that because the rescores are expensive. So that's the other way of doing it. So if they were to pay the credit card today and we did a rescore, we would be looking for you to print out the activity summary showing that the payment was made, what the balance is. We would send that to the bureaus to do a rescore, and 3 to 5 days later, we would be able to repull the report and show the new balance and have a new score. So we can do it in 3 to 5 days if we do the rescores, or generally it's about 45 days if you just have the system work on its own.
Got it. It looks like Meryl's got one last question, and I think that's going to wrap it up. Meryl, just unmute yourself.
Hey, I know we usually use one model over the other, but is Wayfinder or What If, which is the cheapest, easiest, best route to go?
Yeah, so the what if simulator, I like to explain as if you know what you want to do, the what if simulator is the best tool, I think, because first and foremost, we know that if we want to raise somebody's credit scores, we look at the credit card. So I love the what if simulator that allows me to go in and say, well, what if they paid off $500 of the card? That gives me 15 points. And then I can go back in, well, what if they paid $1,000 to the card? You really don't want to run all three bureaus. You really just want to run the simulation on that middle score to determine what you want to do. Now, the Wayfinder, I think, is great because if you're not sure what to do, you can run that report and print it out and give it to the borrower as a step-by-step guideline as to some ideas and suggestions on what to do. I mean, you can do that with the what if simulator too, but the Wayfinder is more of a report designed to give to the borrower to explain the action items that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
I think that's it. We appreciate you, Mark. Thank you. This has been very helpful, as we can do this class 100 times and I always learn something new. So I appreciate you. Me too,
actually.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today. We appreciate you. If you need anything from us or any of the loan officers, just thanks again, guys. Have a great day. Enjoy your Wednesday.
Thank you. Have a great day. It was nice to meet you.